turn now to developments in Syria, where more than 350 people are now reported to have been killed in sectarian violence between tribal fighters loyalist to the Islamist government and those from the Druze minority, which Israel said it's been defending in its recent strikes on its neighbour. Well, in a televised address, Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, said protecting the Druze was a priority for him. He was speaking after Syria's army began withdrawing from the southern city of Suweida, a Druze stronghold where Israel says Syrian forces have been attacking the religious minority there. Well, in what it says was an effort to protect the Druze, Israel launched airstrikes against government buildings in the capital Damascus earlier in the week, reportedly killing at least 3 people. Well, those attacked marked a significant Israeli escalation against Syria. With its own large Druze population, Israel says it intervened to defend their communities in Syria. The Druze don't just live in Syria, but also Lebanon, Israel, as we've mentioned, and the occupied Golan Heights. The Druze faith is an offshoot of Shia Islam with its own unique identity and beliefs. Despite the new Syrian government condemning recent attacks on Druze, the Islamist-dominated administration's also been accused of attacking them. Well, in his televised address, the Syrian leader said he was handing responsibility for security in those Druze areas to elders and local factions. He also warned that anyone starting a war with Syria would regret it.
The Israeli entity resorted to a wide-scale targeting of civilian and government facilities to undermine these efforts, which greatly complicated the situation and would have pushed things to a wide-scale escalation without the effective intervention of American, Arab and Turkish mediations, which saved the region from an unknown fate.
Well, to get more on that, let's speak now to BBC Arabic's Rami Rahayem, who is in Beirut for us. Good to talk to you, Rami. First of all, just to set this conflict into context for viewers who perhaps don't follow Syrian politics as closely, I wonder if you could just start by telling us how and why this recent conflict between the Druze minority fighters and those Bedouin tribals who are more loyal to the Syrian government, how that began to flare up in recent days.
This kind of conflict has been, and this kind of tension between the Druze and the Bedouins in that area has been a feature of that area for a very long time. So it's not something completely unusual. It's something that happens, that recurs. It happened even decades ago and caused a lot of trouble for the state back then. So this is something that happens. What was unusual this time, of course, is that it's happening at a moment when the new Syrian authorities are trying to extend the authority of the state to different provinces in Syria, and that has proven to be a very difficult task following the fall, of course, of the Assad regime, especially in areas where there are religious minorities, such as the province of Suweida. So the central authorities, the new government of Syria, decided to intervene and to attempt, following these clashes, to as I said, extend the authority of the state to Suweida, to send their own forces and basically to establish control over that region. And this is what prompted more clashes between the Syrian government forces and local armed groups in Suweida, and that was followed, as you mentioned, by Israeli airstrikes in support of those factions which are opposed to the central government. That's the general situation. It is one in which the central authority is trying its best to tell people that it is able to preserve the unity of Syria, but it is also viewed with suspicion by many in Syria, and also facing many challenges that are making this task much more difficult. And the very important thing here to say is that Israel has been exploiting this situation in a way by saying that it wants to protect the Druze minority in order to achieve its own purposes in Syria. There are many different views on what exactly these purposes are. Some people believe that the main purpose is to ensure that a very large strip of Syrian land close to the border remains demilitarized at the very least, and others say that it is perhaps even more to ensure that the new government is not able to establish its authority or to unite the country.
Okay, and just another question on that then. There's been a lot of talk about whether there's going to be a ceasefire in that ongoing conflict in Suweida. A ceasefire was announced a couple of days ago, and then it became clear that that hadn't held. Now we're hearing that there is a cessation in hostilities at the moment. What is the latest that you're hearing on that, Rami?
Yes, first of all, there have been many announcements of ceasefires, and at times, you know, it appeared that there are differences within Suweida, within the Druze minority. Some religious leaders would say they support this ceasefire, others would come out and say there's no such thing, and to reject such a ceasefire. The latest deal is the one we're talking about, which was announced yesterday, when the Syrian president said that he's going to withdraw the forces, the government forces, and leave religious elders as well as local groups in charge, and perhaps also security forces made up of locals in charge. These seem to be the broad outlines of this agreement, and the initial reports suggest that it is going according to plan, but I think it's too early to judge. We still need time to see whether this one is going to hold and in what way it's going to hold.
And in terms of that, we of course also heard from the interim leader in Syria, a televised address there from al-Sharaa. Just tell us what else he said then.
He mentioned the mediation efforts by Arab states, Turkey and the Americans in a very positive way, and he said that they prevented the situation from deteriorating even further. He said that Syria is not afraid of war, but that they faced a very difficult choice after the Israelis decided to escalate and attack and bomb Damascus, and that this choice was, you know, one of chaos, utter chaos and destruction, or another way out, and they chose the other way out. I think his comments reflect basically the fact that Syria at this moment does not have options to confront the Israeli attacks, which have been ongoing, by the way, since the fall of the Assad regime. They have no military options to confront the Israelis or even to deter them. Their only option is to attempt to marshal some kind of support from Arab states and perhaps even from the Americans, even though, of course, they understand that the Americans are in very close alliance with the Israelis. And then his speech, I think, reflects that. He said, we are not afraid of war, but we chose to avert the kind of chaos and destruction which such a war would have caused. Perhaps it is a way of putting a brave face on a very difficult situation. In the end, he was unable to exert the authority of the state. He had to decide, he had to pull out the government forces, and he had to accept an arrangement that does not include his original intent to extend the control of the state to the province of Suweida. But he is still trying to convey the message that his priority now is to unify the country and to avoid further sectarian escalation.
Okay, Rami Rahim in Beirut, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on all of those developments in Syria. That's Rami Rahim there watching developments in Syria from Beirut. Well, now let's turn to our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell, who is in Jerusalem for us. So, Yolande, what we saw in the last couple of days were those Israeli strikes on Syria, a significant escalation. Now, Israel, of course, said they were doing that to protect and defend the Druze minority in the country. What is the latest on from Israel on all of this?
Well, a lot of analysis of what's happening on the ground at the moment. I mean, the latest we've been hearing is that things are much calmer with this latest ceasefire agreed in Suweida in southern Syria, so just across from Israel. But still some sporadic violence going on, we understand, that the Syrian government forces have largely withdrawn. Of course, the attacks that Israel launched, there were those very powerful strikes on key government buildings in Damascus, in the Syrian capital, yesterday. There have also been the Israeli military striking on the Syrian government forces who advanced into Suweida, with Israel saying firmly that they were attacking the Druze community there. It said, Israel, that it was not just acting to protect the Syrian Druze minority, but also to protect its own national security, with this sectarian violence taking place, not far away from the territory that Israel controls. Israeli forces crossed from the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights into the Syrian side of the Golan Heights just after we had this takeover, the toppling of President Bashar al-Assad late last year, and this new government of Ahmed al-Sharaa taking over the country. There remains a lot of skepticism based on the fact that they have this Islamist fundamentalist background. We had a lot of very inflammatory rhetoric coming from key figures within the Israeli coalition government, really suggesting that there should be an attempt to topple the current Syrian government, that it was really a jihadist government. That is very much an image, of course, that Ahmed al-Sharaa has tried to overcome since taking office. We have seen him with ties warming with the US, with other players in this region, and security contacts with Israel as well. As much as it has remained a real sort of bone of contention that there have been this presence still of Israeli forces, Israel saying it has to maintain a demilitarized zone in the south of Syria for its own national security interests.
And just, you touched on it already, Yolan, but more broadly, just to again help our viewers through this story, how would you characterise the relationship between Israel and Syria, given that they're neighbours, of course, and given what we've seen in recent days?
I mean, the country remained an enemy state for Israel for all these years under the Assad government. But really, there was a sort of an understanding between them, and that remained relatively calm. The border between Israel and Syria, at least the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and Syria, for many years. But, there was a lot of fear inside Israel about what would happen when this new government took over. We saw Israel acting very strongly, militarily going in, trying to get rid of all of the Syrian government's sort of military assets to reduce its military power. And that also has, of course, reduced the options of Ahmed al-Sharaa as he's confronted these Israeli interventions in Syria in just the past few days. And I think it's all just kind of underscored the real challenge that this new government has when it comes to consolidating its power, when it comes to winning back any trust from the religious minorities in the country, be they the Druze, the Alawites and the Kurds. And of course there are close connections here in the background between Israel's Druze and the Druze inside Syria too.
Yolan Nell in Jerusalem, thank you very much for setting all of that into context.